Hi, and welcome back to our Lent devotions. Today we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 36. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking in the lake. When the disciples saw him walking in the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you in the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt me?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all who were ill to him and begged him to let those who were ill just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. So when we look at passages in youth, the first thing we usually do is talk about what stands out to us in the passage. To me, the main thing that stands out in this passage is the word immediately. It's said 3 times in the passage overall, all in relation to Jesus, and it's even the first word of the passage. Immediately after the feeding of the 5,000 men, Jesus sends the disciples ahead of him on a boat and says farewell to the crowd so he can go up to the mountain and pray. Praying is something we see Jesus do a lot in the Bible, as his relationship with God the Father is incredibly important to him. In our chaotic world, it's great to pray. God loves to hear everything we have to say, even the negative, and help us in every way he can. We see the same word appear again later in the passage. The disciples spot Jesus making his way towards them across the water, and they're terrified. They instantly assume it's the worst, that there's some sort of evil spirit coming after them. But Jesus immediately calls out to them, "Do not be afraid." God doesn't like seeing us worry, so he will tell us not to be afraid and reassure us when things get stressful. That's something I've experienced firsthand by preparing before I go into an exam or a job interview. It's important that when things get tough, we remember God is there in the moment with us, telling us everything will be okay. The final time the word appears in the passage is when Peter steps out in the water to walk with Jesus. He suddenly realizes the strong wind and begins to doubt. At that point, when his mind wanders, Peter starts sinking into the water, panicked. But immediately, Jesus reaches out his hand and catches him. Despite Peter's worry, even though the first thing in Peter's mind was fear and not Jesus, Jesus still catches him with no hesitation. Jesus doesn't look at Peter begin to struggle and say, "Well, you got yourself into this mess, you get yourself out of it." Instead, he helps him. I'm sure we all at some point in our lives have related to Peter here. When things get really scary, God isn't always the first thing that comes to our mind. But thankfully, God's love is greater than our unreliable memory. He's here for us in our lives today, even when things start to go really wrong and we start worrying about the material things of the planet instead of focusing on him. He's still going to offer us a helping hand, even in the worst situations. Thank you.